Alright guys, today we're going to be watching How Israel Was Created by AJ Plus. Now for context, AJ Plus is the English division of Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is a news media organization funded by the Qatari government. So there will be bias in this, most likely against Israel. Now for context, I myself, in terms of political positions in this matter, I think I am more aware of the Israeli perspective than I am of the Palestinian or Arab perspective in all of this. So, if in the comments you want to correct me somewhat or you want to provide me with more information, feel free to do so. This is my first video, so who knows how this goes. But yeah, I'm just looking to learn more about this conflict and many more like it. But let's start.
On November 2nd, 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter that would set off a conflict still being fought more than 100 years later.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate.
Alright, so I'm already pausing, but the reason why they call it Palestine at this point, the land of Israel or the land of Palestine or whatever you want to call it, is because historically it was historically it was called Canaan, the land of Canaan, right? But it was conquered by the Israelites, Hebrews, or the Jews as we know them today. Back, was it? I know you guys know the meme 3,000 years ago, but that's actually a thing. So around 3,000 years ago, in fact, plus, they came into the land, or perhaps the other existing theory was that they were already in the land. I'm off in a tangent here, by the way. So, and I'm only 20 seconds in. But basically, there was Canaan, and then there was the kingdom of Israel, and after that there was Judah and Israel. So two kingdoms. It's split into two kingdoms. And then following that, the north was taken by the Assyrians and the south was taken by the Babylonians, I believe. So over the centuries, a lot of different empires came and went. And the reason why it's called Palestine today is because the Romans, one of the other empires, crushed a Jewish revolt in the land and renamed it Syria Palestina. It was actually a territory encompassing modern-day Syria as well as Israel. And so the reason why they called it Palestina is because it was the, I believe, Greek iteration of the name Philistine, which is a back then perennial enemy of the Jews. So, adding salt to the injury, I guess. But yeah, let's go.
The achievement of this object.
When Balfour wrote of his government's intent to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, 90% of the people living there were not Jewish. Just 31 years later, most of them were gone.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע עם 250 כדורים.
This is the story of the British promise that led to the destruction of Palestine and the creation of the State of Israel. Let's start with the obvious question. Why were the British making promises about other people's countries? The short answer, empire is one hell of a drug. This was World War I, and the British were making lots of promises. In addition to promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine, they promised Arab leaders independence if they rose up against Britain's enemy, the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, so at this time, the Arabs, right, they were mostly referring to the Arabs in Arabia, or Saudi Arabia, as you could say it today. So I believe a few clans, mainly the Al Saud, which is the ruling family of Saudi Arabia today, and the Hussein family, I think. I think they're related, actually, those two families. And the Hussein family, they're in Jordan today, I think, as well as, I think it was just Jordan. Yeah, and so the current king of Jordan is I think King Abdullah II Hussein, something like that. Yeah.
Empire. The Arabs did. Hollywood even made a movie about it.
Arabia's for the Arabs now. That's what I've told them anyway. That's what they think. That's why they're fighting.
Oh, surely.
A month after Balfour's letter, British troops took Palestine, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule. The people who lived there were Arabs, mostly Muslims, but there were Christian and Jewish minorities too. There was also a tiny...
So, this is gonna be a really long video for my first video, but Arabs, it's a common misnomer, I guess you could say, that Arabs are all the same in the sense that they're all the same in terms of blood, right? They're all genetically the same, but that's not quite accurate. So Arabs as we know today, there are actually very few Arabs that are actual Arabs. Most Arabs today are just Arabicized peoples. So basically, after Islam came about in 600, something like that, in early 600s, it spread across not just the Arabian Peninsula, but all across the Middle East and North Africa. And so these other peoples who were at that time previously Christian, they converted to Islam eventually, and they adopted Arabic as their language and adopted the Arabian culture in essence, or Arabic culture. And so they're Arabicized, not necessarily Arab, but today we refer to them to as Arab because we just don't know the difference, I guess. But yeah, just that for context.
Number of European Jews who in the late 1800s had started building small colonies there. At a time when many Jews were suffering horrific persecution in Europe, they felt Palestine could be an escape. The idea of building up a Jewish presence in Palestine became known as Zionism, but it stayed a fringe movement among European Jews. Many of them felt they shouldn't have to leave their countries to avoid persecution. But Zionism as a political movement took a big step forward with an Austrian man called Theodor Herzl. And this guy is a very important name in this story. In 1896, he published Der Judenstaat, or in English, The Jewish State. In it, he said the only way for Jews to avoid Europe's anti-Semitism was not just to leave, but to have their own country. And Herzl didn't just write. The next year,
I'm gonna wait a sec to see if they mentioned the Dreyfus affair, because that is pertinent to this.
organized a conference in Basel, Switzerland, the first Zionist Congress. The attendees agreed on a program which sought, among other things, to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine and promote Jewish settlement in Palestine. From here on out, the Zionist movement became very active, setting up funds to promote Jewish immigration to Palestine, companies to buy land there, and recruiting representatives to advocate for their cause with different governments.
Okay, so I don't think they will mention the Dreyfus affair. Yeah, most likely not. Okay, so in case you don't know, the Dreyfus affair was basically this incident in the, I think, mid to late 1800s in France, where a French officer, I believe, who was Jewish, was essentially politically detained, or wrongfully detained, you could say. And so that became a whole thing, because at that time, it was post 1848, which was basically when Europe as a whole became more nationalistic and became more enlightened in a sense. They were looking at how everybody in society could contribute, and so they were saying to the Jews at the time, oh yeah, if you live in our country, if you're raised in our countries, you're just one of us, right? So this Dreyfus affair, this guy named Dreyfus, who was a Jew in France, working for the French government, technically, he was wrongfully accused of a crime he did not commit or something like that. And so this proved, Theodor Herzl in particular, that Jews needed a Jewish state, essentially. It promoted Zionism within him. And he was, I believe beforehand, he wasn't actually that big into the idea of Zionism. He was originally a believer that Jews just needed to assimilate into European society or Western society or whichever society they reside in. But yeah.
A few days after the conference, Herzl wrote this in his diary.
At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it.
He was only off by 1 year. Okay, so that is a lot of history, but it's important because the Zionist movement is a critical part of the story going forward. Especially after it found a friend in the British government, where a lot of high-ranking officials supported Zionism, sometimes for unexpected reasons. Prime Minister Lloyd George, for example, was a Christian zealot who believed gathering the Jewish people in Palestine would bring Jesus Christ back to earth. Others, like Balfour, believed that getting the Jewish people out of Europe and into their own country would be a good thing. Herzl was pretty visionary when he wrote that the anti-Semitic nations will become our allies. Meanwhile, the Zionists assured Britain that their future country would be a reliable ally.
Right. So historically, I guess we see it, or maybe we don't see it as much today, but it was, I think, more overt back then. Anti-Semitism, right? So hatred. Okay, Semitism itself is kind of this video is going to be super long. Okay. Semitism itself is essentially referring to the people of Shem in the Bible, if you didn't know. But basically, that's referring to Middle Easterners in that area of the world. So, by technicality, not only are Jews involved in that, fall under that category, but technically, Arabs are as well. It's just today when we say the term anti-Semitism, or we see that term, it's very often used just for Jews. And going back here, Christian zealot, right? So that's the term they use. Christian Zionism is a relatively recent thing. It was only in the last couple hundred years that such a thing was prevalent, and it was, and still is, mostly around Protestant denominations of Christianity, not really older denominations like Catholicism or Orthodox. Yeah, so Christian anti-Semitism or hatred of Jews has been around for quite a while. Yeah.
So that's the backstory of how European anti-Semitism, Zionism, and British imperialism all led to the Balfour Declaration, this British promise to build a homeland for Jews in Palestine. Now we're going to look at how Britain did that. World War I had been a conflict between rival empires, and the winners set up the League of Nations to distribute the losing side's territories between them. They called it the Mandate System, putting territories once controlled by the Ottoman and German empires under the, quote, tutelage of advanced nations until they became independent. Britain was given the mandate over Palestine, but the Palestinian people were never asked what they wanted or what independence would look like to them. Listen to what Balfour wrote to one of his colleagues.
For in Palestine we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country.
Instead, it was the Zionists who were consulted about what their vision for Palestine was, and so the mandate ended up incorporating not just the Balfour Declaration, but several clauses requiring Britain to ensure the establishment of a Jewish home in Palestine. British rule was very accommodating to the Zionist project. The Jewish community in Palestine grew with big waves of immigration. They had their own schools and factories and even their own militia, the Haganah, and they were led by the Polish-born David Ben-Gurion, the leader of their representative body, the Jewish Agency.
So, I guess at this point you might be wondering, like, why was there historically such a small number of Jews in Palestine, or the land of Palestine, or the land of Israel? Why was that the case, and why did they suddenly move it now? Is it just because they're British, or what? Now, it's important to realize that at this time, Zionism was not believed, or a political ideology. It was not believed to be, as defined by Theodor Herzl, was not believed to be true or valid by all Jewish communities. It was by some. And most of these were actually on the more secular side, because the traditional Jewish understanding of Zionism, or basically returning to the land of Israel that they were exiled from 2,000 years ago by the Romans, was that it would only come at the behest of the Lord, of God, basically, and the arrival of the Messiah. Now, this is why like the rabbis and the rabbinic, I guess, councils and whatever was the reason basically why they were not really going there as much. There were still Jews there, of course, in the land of Palestine, but they were a small number. They were mostly there from back 2,000 years ago, the few that were not expelled by the Romans.
To the Palestinians, it was clear that Britain wasn't delivering them independence. It was delivering their country to other people. In 1936, they went on strike. British forces tried to break the strike with arrests, torture, mass punishment, and executions. Leaders were exiled, weapons confiscated, and houses blown up. Palestinian fighters attacked British and Jewish targets, while British and Haganah forces would carry out joint raids on Palestinian villages. Something had to change. The British government sent a commission called the Peel Commission to figure it out, but their proposed solution was typical. Just draw another British line on the map, divide the country, give this part to the Jews and this part to the Palestinians, and make that part of Transjordan next door.
Right, so this part over here is actually the current nation of Jordan. It was known as Transjordan at the time because this is the Jordan River, and it's still there today. You might have heard the phrase "What you chant from the river to the sea." When they're talking about that, they're talking about the Mediterranean Sea over here and the Jordan River here. So basically, all of this, and Transjordan, or Jordan as we know today, is actually ruled by King Abdullah II, Al Hussein or something like that. So his great grandfather or something like that was one of the leaders that worked with the British in order to secure a state for themselves. And actually, I'm not sure if they'll talk about this later, probably not, but most of or a large portion of the population in Jordan today are actually Palestinians. Yeah.
Oh, and because the Palestinians were a majority in the country, 250,000 of them would have to be removed by force to make the Jewish state viable. Remember, these were the proposals that were meant to calm things down. Spoiler, they didn't. Instead, the revolt continued until 1939, by which time about 10% of Palestine's adult male population had either been killed, injured, arrested, or exiled. The British government really needed a solution. So
I think everybody knows that, or well, some people, I think most people know that Israel became a country officially by the UN or something like that in 1948. But the reality was that up from basically the point where Jewish immigration was going into land Palestine or Israel, there was always like conflict between these European Jews and the native Arabs in the land. And the reason why I say native is going back to the point about Arabization, or Arab, I don't know the word exactly. Basically, what happened was that over the millennia, or the current Palestinian Arabs, I guess you could say, are really just descendants of the people who lived there historically. So originally it was Canaanites, and then there's still historical, I guess, conflictions about where exactly the Jews came from, but and then there were the Jews, and so the current population of Palestinian Arabs are known to be they share like very close genetic relations with the Canaanites of history, basically, and so do the Jews, by the way, and so really they both have a genetic claim to the land. In case you didn't know, this video is going on forever.
Here comes another report.
The Commission is studying the 20-year-old Jewish settlements in British-mandated Palestine.
The 1939 White Paper created a conflict between the British and the Zionists for the first time, because it rejected partition and said the solution was for Palestine to gain independence within 10 years, with everyone living there sharing it together. Crucially, it also imposed severe limits on Jewish land purchases and immigration. To the Zionists, this felt like a betrayal. In response, some set off bombs across the country, killing dozens of Palestinians. But soon, everyone was distracted by something much bigger.
So I'm not sure if they're going to talk about they might. I'm not sure. The King David bombing. So or not King David, sorry, Hotel of King David, or something like that. King David Hotel bomb, yeah. So throughout this time, there was conflict between not just the Arabs and the Jews, but also conflict between those two groups and the British. The British that were stationed in the land. And so on the Jewish side, you had like three, I think, paramilitary militias, you could say. I think their name was Haganah, as mentioned in the video, as well as factions that broke off from Haganah. I think they were like Lehi or something like that. And there was another one. I kind of forgot. But basically, there were, by today's standards, you would say there were terrorist attacks by the Israelis at that point, or I guess the Jews at that point, against civilians and all that. And there were massacres, like I think, was it 1929 or something like that? Hebron massacre. There were a few more committed against both sides, frankly, Jews and Arabs. So from the start of Jewish immigration to the land until like 1948, there was never really a cease in any tensions or skirmishes, you could say.
More than 60 million people were killed in World War II, including 6 million Jews murdered in Nazi death camps. Jewish survivors fled Europe, with a large number of them trying to find safety in Palestine despite the British limit on Jewish immigration. This set off a more direct confrontation between the Zionists and the British, with Palestinians often targeted as well. The Zionists knew two things. Militarily, they were stronger than the Palestinians, and Britain was exhausted by World War II, so it wouldn't have the stomach to keep fighting in Palestine. They were right. In 1947, after 30 years of occupation, Britain announced it was quitting Palestine and asked the newly formed United Nations to clean up its mess. Alright, 1947 and 1948 are the most pivotal years in this story, so let's take a look at how things are lining up. During British rule, Jews had gone from 10% to 30% of the population, and owned about 6% of the land. Under Ben-Gurion's leadership, the Jewish Agency was pretty much functioning as a government for the Jewish community. And the Zionist militias had tens of thousands of soldiers, modern weapons, and officers who'd already fought in World War II. On the other side, the Palestinians hadn't been allowed to develop their own administration or military. But as they waited for the UN solution...
So that point about the Jews having officers who fought in World War II, that is true. And the reason why that's the case is because, not just because of the Allied forces, who some of them were Jews, like Jewish officers or whatever, and Jewish soldiers, but also Holocaust survivors actually came in at some point and joined the Jews in the 1948 war. So it was pretty wild that happened, but that was what happened.
They were still the majority all over the country. In November 1947, the UN, then only made up of a fraction of the world's countries, voted to partition Palestine. This plan marked off 55% of the country for a Jewish state, but the UN never explained how it could be a Jewish state when half the people in its territory were Palestinian. To nobody's surprise, Palestinians, and in fact all Arabs, rejected the UN's plan. Ben-Gurion and the Zionist leadership accepted, but they saw an opportunity. With the British on the way out, the Zionists knew they would have the strongest military in Palestine. Their forces were instructed to seize more territory than they'd been awarded by the UN, and to do what was necessary to reduce the number of Palestinians in it. In cities like Haifa, the militia set off car bombs in Palestinian neighborhoods. They attacked villages and forced residents out.
Haganah troops have driven the Arabs out of the beleaguered city, taking many prisoners.
After inspecting parts of western Jerusalem that had been emptied of Palestinians, Ben-Gurion said,
"In many Arab neighborhoods in the west, you do not see even one Arab. If we persist, it is quite possible that in the next 6 or 8 months there will be considerable changes in the country, and to our advantage."
One of the events that helped speed up these changes took place on April 9th, 1948, when the village of Deir Yassin was attacked. A British government report to the United Nations describes the scene. 250 people were killed in circumstances of great savagery. Women and children were stripped, lined up, photographed, and then slaughtered by automatic firing. The story of what happened at Deir Yassin set off panic all over the country. As news spread, people fled, fearing they would be next. Historians have recorded dozens of similar massacres during this period. Each time, they would result in entire communities fleeing.
תמיד הייתה הוראה, והייתה הוראה של בן גוריון, לגרש את האנשים משם. כבשנו את המקום, טרקטורים חרשו את המקום. חרשו. לא נשאר זכר של כפר. למה? לא רצו שתהיה, לא חזרה ולא זכר של המקום.
By the time Britain ended it...
On a side note, the Palestinians, you may or may not have seen this around, but some of them carry keys around their necks that lead back to their homes at this time, 1948. They call it the Nakba, which in Arabic means catastrophe, because I believe it was 750K of those guys, of the Palestinians, were expelled from the land. So yeah, and the reason why, so the timeline could be a little bit confusing, 1947 to 1948. So actually, in 1947, the UN resolution passed in regards to a Jewish state being created, I think. And so what happened afterwards was that it was set to, the British were set to pull out of mandatory Palestine in 1948. And so I think it was the day of, or the day before, or like a few hours before they pulled out, that is when Israel became a thing. When David Ben-Gurion proclaimed that Israel was a state. So that was what happened.
Mandate. On May 15th, 1948, 250,000 Palestinians had fled. The night before, David Ben-Gurion announced the founding of the State of Israel, with himself as its first prime minister. He was standing under a giant portrait of Herzl, 51 years after Herzl had predicted this very moment.
It's important to remember, as I've said before, all these guys here, or I think most of them, including Ben-Gurion himself, were actually non-religious or secular Jews, you could say. So an important thing to understand about Jewish, or I guess Jews in general, is that being a Jew is hereditary. So you don't necessarily have to believe in Judaism to be a Jew. You just have to be, well, they changed this definition after, I think, the Holocaust, especially amongst some more liberal denominations of Judaism. But basically, historically, you had to have a Jewish mother in order to be classified as a Jew. So all these guys will be Jews, but they aren't necessarily practicing Jews. If you catch my drift. And Theodor Herzl himself was not a practicing Jew, even though he was Jewish by blood.
The Zionist militias came together as the newly formed Israel Defense Forces, but the fighting wasn't over. With the British out of the way, soldiers from several Arab countries entered Palestine. But the Israeli army was better equipped, better organized, and unlike the Arab armies, had a unified command and backing from several European countries.
So this part, I'm pretty sure is false, like blatantly false. If I'm mistaken, you can correct me in the comments or whatever. But as far as I'm aware, what actually happened was, this video is going to be super long. Okay, so basically the surrounding nations at this time were somewhat recently became their own countries because, well, Britain and France and all these other European powers had colonies like in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Iraq or whatever. And so all these colonies, they did have British or other types of European formal military training. And I believe in the case of, was it Lebanon or Syria? It was one of those where there was actually British officers directly in the fight on the side of the Arabs, leading Arab men against Israel in that war in 1948. Meanwhile, Israel actually didn't have any European backing besides Czechoslovakia, which sold them weapons. And Czechoslovakia sold them weapons, I believe it was because of the USSR at the time, decided to do that for some reason. And actually the United States didn't help either, even though today you would assume that they're very close allies, when it started, when Israel started being a state and it was attacked immediately, they actually had I believe, weapons or trade embargo by the U.S., something like that. So, yeah, Israel was for the most part quite isolated, and the surrounding Arab countries. Granted, they were different countries, so militarily they were not united as much. But you know, it's not definitely what this video makes it out to be.
Israeli forces pushed into places that the UN had assigned to the Palestinian state, like the towns of Lidda and Ramle. 50,000 people were forced to flee from there, many on foot, in what became known as the Lidda Death March. After being emptied, the towns were given Hebrew names, Lod and Ramla. Like in many other emptied towns, the buildings and homes were taken over by the new Israeli state and given to Jews. By the time the UN secured an armistice, 3/4 of the Palestinian people had become refugees. In Arabic, they call this the Nakba, literally the catastrophe. The new state of Israel made up 78% of what had been Palestine. The remaining parts were annexed by Jordan or taken over by Egypt.
Right. So, where the heck is that? In the original, so going back to here, in the original UN resolution, you can say this was supposed to be Israel, and this was supposed to be all Palestine, and Jerusalem was supposed to be an international city. But what actually happened was that, first of all of this became Jordan, so a new country, and this was taken. I guess I'll go back to here. All this land that was supposed to go to Palestine was taken because the Arab countries, as well as the Palestinians themselves, attacked Israel in that war in 1948, right after Israel was self-declared itself a state. And so after the war, which was several Arab countries against Israel, Israel won, and this part, which is Gaza today, and this part, which is the West Bank, because it's the West Bank of the Jordan River, they were annexed by Egypt and Jordan, respectively.
A year later, the UN passed a resolution calling for all Palestinian refugees to be allowed to return home. They never have been. Palestine had been erased. In the decades since, attempts to resolve this conflict have again tried to partition the land. With each successive attempt, the territory offered to Palestinians in their historic homeland shrinks even more. Ironically, Israel is still struggling to maintain the population advantage it gained in 1948 when it forced all those people out, because in 1967 it occupied the West Bank and Gaza, bringing all the Palestinians living there under its rule. And so today, the population of Jews and non-Jews in this land is roughly equal. But those living under occupation have no rights, no citizenship, and no prospect of independence. The Nakba-era tactics of settlement, home demolitions.
So, about the no rights thing, it's important to separate the distinction, or notice the distinction between Arabs in Israel proper versus Arabs in the West Bank or Gaza. So the Arabs in the Palestinian territories are under the authority of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which was set up like sometime later. So that's a different thing. But the Arabs in Israel itself has quite a lot of, they have the same equal rights as everybody else, like citizenship and all that. So that's a bit off. But besides that, the Palestinian Arabs in the Palestinian authorities definitely do face restrictions in terms of movement. They have checkpoints and all that, and they're basically not allowed the same freedom of movement as their Arab brothers, I guess you could say, in Israel proper. And that's because they're not going to mention this because the video is quite short and doesn't go all the way to the modern day. But there were a lot of terrorist attacks that happened later on. So, but we'll get to that maybe in another video.
and expulsion are still used against them.
Nakba, Nakba, no! We want Nakba, Nakba, no!
Yeah, there are a lot of Jewish extremists, I guess you could say. These videos do not do them any favors, by the way.
Israel has taken the land but wants nothing to do with the millions under its rule. International, Israeli, and Palestinian human rights groups say this system is a form of apartheid. To see if that's an accurate description of Israel more than 100 years after Balfour's Promise, watch this video here.
Alright, so that was, well, holy crap, how long is this video? Dang, okay. So that was my first video, guys. Honestly, I talked like probably a lot in this video, but you know, we'll see how this video goes. If you guys want me to watch anything else, and there's some other video, not just necessarily about the Israel-Palestine conflicts, but maybe give me a different perspective on things for some other conflicts, like, I don't know, Kashmir or something like that. Yeah, sure, I'll be down. I know a bit more about this conflict than others, so don't expect me to talk all the time when I watch something else. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.